For my homily this week, I'm always trying to make connections, to take a look at our readings and put them together with what's going on in our world, what's going on liturgically, the different things that we're celebrating. And I have to admit, this week, things didn't really come together very well at the beginning, because reflecting on this being Valentine's Day, it's what we call World Marriage Sunday, a day to pray for married couples and to offer them support. So I wanted to preach on that, and yet I looked at the readings, and the story of Jesus healing the lepers, reflecting on leprosy, didn't necessarily come to mind as a clear connection for me. But as I started to think a little bit deeper about it, I started to reflect on those married couples that have inspired me, that I've been witness to in my years now as a priest. I have to say that one of the most inspiring things that I do see is the way that married couples do care for one another as they age, as one becomes sick or ill. To see some of those couples in their tender care for one another and how they devote themselves so beautifully and lovingly after decades of marriage to care for that sick spouse, to be attentive to their needs. And so that's one connection that did ultimately come to mind for me. Another connection came to mind when I reflected on somebody who's on the path to sainthood, who might tie some of these things together. Marriage, caring for the ill and the sick, also Black History Month that we're in right now, and as we enter this final week, this final Sunday before we begin our Lenten season. And that's a man named Venerable Pierre Toussaint. Venerable Pierre was somebody who was born in Haiti back in 1766, born as a slave to a Catholic family, and was also raised up in the Catholic faith. Eventually, he went with the family who owned him all the way to New York, along with some of his other relatives. And it was in New York City that, in fact, Pierre was allowed to apprentice as a hairdresser to some of the wealthiest people in New York. And so through this, he actually became a man who had wealth and cared not only for himself and for other slaves, he even cared for his master's widow after his master passed away. As that widow passed away, he ultimately gained his freedom when he was 41 years old. And so with this, he continued to work as a hairdresser, growing in wealth. And he ultimately also met a woman who he married. Her name was Marie Rose. And Marie, he actually had purchased her in the sense of having to free her from her slavery, purchased her out of slavery. And they were married in their 40s. Well, he was in his 40s and she was about 20 years younger. But together they cared for many people. They cared for the ill, they cared for the poor, both those who are black and those who are white. And he was really attentive to his Catholic faith. In fact, he was a daily mass goer in New York City. He actually became one of the most well-known Catholics in New York City. And he continued to care for those who were most in need. They never had children of their own, but they did in fact care for others, including his orphaned niece at one point and other children. So they were people that were always aiming to spread the good news through loving concern for one another and through loving concern for those who are most sick, most in need in their society. And so Pierre, with his wealth, really could have retired and taken care of himself and his wife. Someone once said that to him, why don't you, just retire and enjoy the wealth you built since the hard work you've done throughout your life. And he says, I have enough for myself, but if I stop working, I will not have enough for others. And so this shows his great dedication to caring for the poor, for the needy, for those who were most in need. And so we can see how all these strands kind of tie together of what it means for us to follow the lives of those who are holy, those who are on the path to sainthood. To be venerable means somebody whose life has been examined and is worthy of imitation. And now there's two more stages. That is where the miracles come in, that there has to be the presence of miracles that take place to that saint's intercession. And so the next step is once a miracle is studied by the Vatican and approved, he would become blessed, and then the next stage after that would be him becoming a saint and canonization. But in the life of Pierre and his wife Marie, they showed great care for those who are most in need. They show what it means to follow the Lord. They show what it means to love one another as husband and wife. And so now as we prepare for Lent, just a few days away, we can reflect on our own lives and how we are called to live out our lives of faith in a deeper way. Now for Lent, we know that there's certain practices that we enter into with fasting, with abstinence from meat, and these kind of things, and we have that tradition of giving things up for the Lenten season. But I think what's most important for us to look at is our relationships. This Lent should be a time, when we can focus on our relationships with one another. How can we deepen and improve those relationships? So, for example, as a married couples, to look and say, what is the one biggest struggle that I'm having, or what's my biggest fault that I recognize I'm not being as good a husband or as good a wife as I could be in this particular area? What's that biggest area? It's probably not that I have to give up sweets and chocolates, right? The common thing that people do for Lent. It's probably something a bit deeper than that. So to really reflect, what's my greatest fault that I need to work on in my relationship with my spouse? And of course, also our relationship with God. How do I need to build that relationship with God? What is it that I'm missing? Am I really just not taking much time for prayer? Am I kind of rushing through my prayers or distracted in some way? Whatever it is in terms of our relationship with God. Maybe it's praying together more as a couple. Maybe it's saying we don't really pray with each other, but we want to introduce some prayer together as a couple, and that can help us grow in our marriage that way. So whatever it is, whether we're married or not married, for Lent we want to focus on our relationships, our relationship with God, our relationship with other people. What's our biggest faults in these areas, and how can we strengthen them during this Lenten season? How can we ask the Lord to give us that grace, to say, Lord, I know I'm deficient in this area. I know I need your grace. I know I need your help. Open me up for that healing that I need so that I can be the spouse, the friend, the priest, the whatever category we might look at, how I can be better in whatever these areas are in the course of my life. And so as we prepare to enter into this Lenten season, as we reflect on what it means to care for those who are most in need, we pray that Venerable Pierre Toussaint and his wife Marie may intercede for us. We pray that God's great love for us in his passion and his death and his desire to come among us and to heal us of whatever it is that we're afflicted with. We pray that all this will come together for us. These connections will be built so we can live a life truly of a deep faith in Jesus and his healing power and his transforming work, in the fact that he wants to give us new hearts so we can follow him, so we can love one another as we are called to do.